From renowned trauma expert Dr. Judith Herman, author of the groundbreaking classic Trauma and Recovery, comes her new book, Truth and Repair, offering a powerful manifesto for reimagining justice based on the testimony of survivors. Truth and Repair is what Anita Hill calls an inspiring and practical call to action, deeply researched and compassionately told. Truth and Repair envisions a new path to justice for all. Available wherever books are sold.
As a charge nurse, you can be a confident and dynamic leader who supports the nursing team and guides their patient care. Grand Canyon University's RN to BSN online degree program equips you with strategies that prepare you to manage the ever-changing realities of healthcare while maintaining focus on family support and patient outcomes. What do you think making a difference in healthcare looks like? GCU offers over 250 high-quality online programs like this one. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.
Gas mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna cook a meal that's gonna make you mine. I'm turning up the oven, now we're ready to roast. When you touch me, honey, you'll love me the most. Come on and put me in your loving shoe.
Welcome to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is Bill Indick. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Stuart. I'm happy to be here.
I'm talking to Bill about his book, Psychology for Screenwriters, which is enjoying its second edition in 2022. Bill, do you want to give people... Because I made the mistake when I first read the email that I got from the publishers, that this was about helping screenwriters psychologically. But then when I reread it, and obviously now I've got the book and I've been able to read it, this is about using psychology to be a better screenwriter.
You're the first person who's ever made that association that it's psychology. It's just like a therapy book for screenwriters. I don't think anyone else read it that way. So it's a unique approach.
Well, I think if we get into the psychology of it, I think Freud might have a lot to say. That's what I read first.
I've spoken with a lot of screenwriters over the past 20 years or so since I've written the book. And at a very, very basic level, all screenwriters are using it as a therapeutic process for themselves. They have a story they need to tell. The story invariably is about themselves, although they might not be completely aware of it. And the urgency and the need to get that story out is a real psychological need.
Absolutely. I mean, I can talk to an example where it was not even like a thinly veiled attempt at trying to do it. It was literally during lockdown. I wrote a screenplay where it had a female protagonist, and I was writing it because I couldn't see my mother, who was in hospital. She was 200 miles away, and I put all my angst and anxiety into this character as to try and think about my mother through my writing. I mean, it was there was nothing thin veiled about it at all. It was only later that I realized it's the story of an Uber driver, the female character, who picks up a guy and they go 300 miles in the car. And it was only when I recently had it analysed as part of some writing group that I attended that I learned that I'm the passenger in the car.
Right. So yeah, that's certainly what a metaphor for a relationship with a mother other than driving inside her vessel as she brings you into the world. A wonderful metaphor.
Indeed. So for you, just to give people an idea of where this, why write the book in the first place? What give you the sort of trigger for that? And then the second question is, why are we getting a second edition now?
Right. So this is going back. The first edition was published in 2004. So I wrote it in 2003. So it's about 20 years old. At the time, I was conflicted in myself about where I wanted to go with my writing. And I was very, very interested in movies, and I liked writing about movies, but I also liked writing movies themselves. And also at the time I had finished my PhD in developmental psychology from Cornell. So I was a professor and I was like, so how can I tie all of this stuff in together? And I was writing books on, or I was writing my first book on film analysis, or the psychology of film. And I did get in touch with Michael Weitz Productions, who wrote The Hero's Journey, which was a great book and one that opened up my eyes a lot to the psychology of screenwriting. So I wound up taking all of my psychology ideas that I had applied to film already and just sort of flipping them for Michael Weitz, writing Psychology for Screenwriters, as a way not of analyzing film, but of thinking about writing characters and writing stories with knowledge of the sort of psychological nuts and bolts behind it. So rather than trying to understand psychology through film, it was more of how do you write film using an understanding of psychology. And I didn't think much of it at the time. It was like, oh, okay, this is another way of me exploring psychology in film. But the book found an audience, I think, especially among classes, screenwriting classes, perhaps because I'm an academic and the book itself lends itself well to academia because there's lessons and, theorists and tons of content that could not just be applied to film, but applied to psychology. So the book kept on, finding audiences. It was translated into 7 languages. And so after 20 years or close to 20 years, I got the call, hey, let's do a second edition. A lot more movies have come out since 2004. There's interest. There's other countries, other publishers who want to translate it into other languages. So that's basically the story of the book. I never thought it would amount to anything, but it has found a following, and it certainly has earned a second edition.
Indeed. So what is? I mean, I can see from the film examples what's new, but what in particular, content wise, from a psychology point of view, have you added to what was already there?
Well, the original, I changed the structure of the original book. So essentially, in the original structure, there were, I think, 7 or 8 different theories that I covered. Certainly, the sort of classic theories, Freud, Jung, Adler, Erikson. And also I added a couple of others, such as Rollo May, who's an existential psychoanalyst, and also Joseph Campbell, who is not a psychologist, but certainly his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, is more psychological than most of the psychology books I've read. And also because the hero's journey model is so well known, and because it's a classic model of the hero, it's retrograde, meaning it shows a version not just of males, but of females that are really sort of more suitable for maybe 2,000, 3,000 years ago. So I add, in the original book, I added a chapter on the heroine's journey, the female hero's journey. So for the new edition, all I did was I took those theories and sort of brushed them up a little bit, made them a little bit tighter, and then I added 3 chapters. And I decided not to add 3 new theorists because I felt that I had covered as much theory as I wanted to in the first book. So I did 3 new chapters, each one a psychological study of a film genre.
Okay.
So the Western, fantasy, and science fiction. So those are the 3 new chapters.
Well, okay. Psychology for Screenwriters, second edition, is available for Michael Weitz Productions, and it's by Bill Indick, who I'm talking to now. And what we're going to do, as a way, hopefully, to illustrate some of the theories, is follow my 3x5 format. So Bill has very kindly given me 3 prompts, and what we're going to do is use those as a trigger to a conversation, hopefully, but obviously more leaning on Bill for this. I'll hopefully just be help to clarify what you're talking about. But before we do, I'll just remind people of the format. So it's the 3 headings. We'll go 5 minutes against the clock, and every time the alarm goes, which is when you'll hear this noise, that's when we move on to the next one. That makes sense to you, Bill?
Great.
Question number 1 to sort of consider is, how is your protagonist conflicted about his or her identity? What were you trying to get at here with this? What were you trying to draw out?
Right. And I have to admit, when you gave me the questions, the prompts, initially I was kind of thrown, and then I was very, very busy. And then I realized, I have to respond. So I did something which I do often, which is I didn't think about it. I just wrote out 3 prompts and sent them, knowing that obviously there's something behind it. And that's something I actually recommend for screenwriters is if you don't know what to write, just write something. Don't even think about it. Just write. And more often than not, you knew what to write to begin with. It was all this conscious deliberation that was blocking you. To go back to the question, so my thought when I read these prompts this morning was, oh, I see what I was getting at. And it's the idea that, so every story has at least a couple of stories going on inside of it. So if you're watching a movie, well, that's the story of all these characters and the plot and things going on. But each character has an inner story that's going on, and that's character development. Okay. And all of those stories are going to be told in various ways, but the protagonist has the fullest story, meaning they're going to somehow have to come full circle and change as a person. Otherwise, your protagonist isn't doing their job as a main character, which is to develop in some way, which is to change. And my primary argument about why we watch movies and why we get so obsessed with movies and movies characters is because we so desperately ourselves want to develop and change as people, and become better people. And we do that vicariously by identifying with the protagonist. So the protagonist always has to be conflicted. That's obvious. And it's because of this story within the story. Similar to, I was hearing Eddie Van Halen in an interview talking about his guitar solos. Okay. And they said, what's your approach to the guitar solo? And he said, well, it's a song within a song. It's a melody. It's a song that encapsulates the melody of the entire song, but within a brief solo. And that's what's going on with the protagonist and really any character. A song within a song, or a story within a story about that character's development. And it begins with the conflict. What about themselves they don't like? Yeah.
So it's like, and in a way, the way to best sort of draw that out in a story is for your plot that we see, which we see on the surface, is going to challenge that conflict in there, what's inside them.
Yeah. It's going to draw it out. And again, to go back to Eddie Van Halen, he was asked, well, so if the guitar solo is a song within a song, what comes first, the guitar solo or the song itself? Yeah. And Eddie said, well, it's different every time, but oftentimes he would come up with a solo, and it would be in a certain key with a certain rhythm and a certain harmonic to it. And then he would get busy writing a song around that solo. And I think that's one way to approach screenwriting is think of your character, get inside your character, and then come up with a story that is the perfect sort of set piece for that character's identity development.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, it's interesting when even from the outset there, where you say just write, a lesson that I sort of learned. I started an exercise that became a lesson. I didn't understand it would go that way. Is that over lockdown, I started writing stream of conscious sort of short stories where I'd just give myself an hour and I'd write whatever came up. And usually I use the photograph as a prompt. So I'd have like two constraints, which is fill 3 pages and use this photograph as a prompt. So obviously nothing was ever planned. Nothing's ever, in fact, I don't even look at the pages before I even start. I get up in the morning, I turn the page of the book and like, there's a picture staring at me going, right. But I realized through the exercise how important it was for me to be talking to the character, which I always thought was a load of hooey as someone who's sort of, I'm 50, but I'm new to writing in sort of like only the last decade or so as sort of creative writing front. And I always thought of that idea of knowing my character or talking to my character as being absolute hooey, but having done it now for so long, I've realized that that is where the best thing, where you discover a dialogue between you and your character is where the best things happen.
And you're speaking with all of your characters all the time, but you're not necessarily aware of it. And that was sort of the great insight of Freud, is this idea that we have our entire psychological life going on all the time, but we're not aware of it because we're focusing on work, or we're focusing on driving, or we're focusing on that very specific thing that our attention is sort of monopolized by. And if you just let that, if you trick yourself into not focusing, all of that psychological content is going to sort of naturally flow out. So a Rorschach test, which is basically what you're doing with that picture, is it's a stimulus.
Go finish your thought.
Yep. So it's a stimulus. So you give yourself a stimulus. It's an ambiguous stimulus, and because it's ambiguous, and because you're purposefully not focusing in a very specific way, but opening up your mind to all possibilities, all of those ideas that were in your head but sort of blocked up do come out. And they don't always make sense. It's not always the best ideas. Oftentimes I find using that sort of stream of consciousness process, a lot comes out that is totally useless or like redundant or boring.
Yeah.
But you get those gems that wouldn't have otherwise come out.
No, exactly. No, I mean,
300
days later, you've got maybe 10 good things, but you have to do the 300 days to get the 10.
Yeah. So you're on your 3 pages. I'm sure not all of those 3 pages are useful, but if you get 2 or 3 useful things, it's a completely, worthwhile endeavor.
Indeed. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I even go so far as to, when I finish writing the 3 pages, I summarize it into a tweet, which is then another constraint. Go, what have I got in my head? Have I got a character? Have I got a story? Which might just be a reflection of where I think it's going, not even what's on the page. It's like because your mind's already racing. So you're like, what have I got?
Yeah.
And what's the best way of expressing this idea now? And I keep that in a spreadsheet. So it's like, I have this reference point that I can go back to prompt wise, if needs be. I've not had to yet, but one screenplay was born out of one of those exercises. So I can tell you, it definitely works for me. And just thinking about the idea of conflicted about his own identity, I watched the film Nanny. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I haven't seen it. I saw I saw the trailer, but I didn't see the film yet.
And the central character is a mother from Senegal who's working as a nanny in upstate New York City, uptown New York City, and she's being a nanny. So it's like she's missing her child, but looking after somebody else's child. So the whole basis of the character's role in the film is she's conflicted, and then obviously that struggle is what comes out of her during the process of the film.
And that's again, and it's so simple, but it's such an important concept to constantly remind yourself: is who is my character? Meaning, what is it about themselves that they don't like? Why are they trying to change? And if you ask, well, why does this character have to want to change at all? I would say, go back to the beginning, to this whole idea of what story is and what film.
Well, you're segueing to number 2. So number 2 is, why does your protagonist hate himself or herself?
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your character has to know why they hate themselves, or even that they're even a little bit aware that they hate themselves. And this is where that sort of interesting sympathy between the viewer and the character come in, where if I asked you, hello, hey, Stuart, what thing about yourself do you hate? And it would probably take you back for a second and be like, well, I don't hate myself at all.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you're writing a story about yourself, don't you need something about yourself that is going to be a goal? Some type of obstacle that you have to overcome. And if that obstacle ultimately is yourself, well, there we have your story. Your story, which is everybody's story, is how do I become the best me if I'm not even completely sure what that is, and I'm not even sure who I am now and what I need to change. And so that interesting sympathy between viewer and character plays out in that they both share that. We're always aware, I need to become a better person. I need to change, be a better writer, a better filmmaker, a better father, husband, professor, whatever. We're sort of subtly aware of that. But when you're sort of, like we were talking about a moment ago, when you force structure upon an ambiguous situation and say, don't think about it, just write, but write 3 pages or write in response to this prompt. So when we take a character, we put him into the sort of fake milieu of a film where everything is not just created, but created specifically to get into this character's head and to get into what's going on for them. That's creativity, meaning that's taking an ambiguous stimulus, putting it in a somewhat rigid structure in order to sort of take it apart, to deconstruct it and put it back together again.
So I mean, obviously hate's a very strong word. So in a way, it doesn't always have to be to that sort of extreme limit, does it? I mean, self-loathing can be. Everyone's got an element of it who's got some humility to them. I mean, I guess if you don't think you need to improve, then essentially, I'm guessing from a psychological point of view, you're dealing with a narcissist or you're dealing with a psychopath or something, aren't you? At that point, and you're dealing. I mean, and I use the terms love and hate because they catch your attention. They're very strong terms, but also I think if
again, if you get into yourself and you're saying, okay, I have to dig deep within myself and then somehow project that outwardly onto my character. So if you think about yourself for a moment and think about, well, what about myself am I trying to become better at? And you think of, that thing about yourself that you don't want to be anymore. Hate is a proper word because it's not that you hate yourself, but you hate that thing about yourself.
Yeah.
And because it's you and because you understand, okay, I can say I hate that part about myself and not necessarily say I'm hating myself as a person, but I hate that specific trait.
Yeah.
I think hate becomes the proper word because you hate it. You want to get rid of it. You don't want that to reflect on you.
No, that makes sense. No, I just, it's like that. Essentially, I was really just clarifying it, to be honest with you, because I think that's very true. I think we can hate aspects of ourselves, but we don't control how we improve that, because we can, plenty of us will walk into a social situation and be overwhelmed by the fact there's lots of people in the room and it'll happen repeatedly. And you either don't go to things where you're going to get overwhelmed or you could confront it and maybe things will change, but you've always got that choice. I remember recently I was doing nothing to do with screenwriting. I was interviewing filmmakers and it was all done live to camera. They were coming on the red carpet, and it was the first time I'd ever done this. I'd never had this experience in my life, and I was walking up to the cinema, and I'm thinking, I could just go home now. I don't need to do this. I don't need to put this in my life right now. And it was a real sort of like a tug of war in me. But I knew I had to do it because to walk away would have been, I'd have hated myself even more at that point. And then you go and do it, and you come out. You've had yourself a little victory, and and I can't remember when I read this. I did it. I used to work in change management, and somebody once described, if you're not uncomfortable doing something, then you never develop as a person in business. Was the kind of thing when we were trying to get people to understand that change isn't a threat; it's just part of personal development. So I guess if you can confront that in a story, you're doing what's a universal truth then, aren't you?
Yeah. And so you have to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation in order to change, because you're not going to extend your reach if you're never trying to grasp for something just out of reach. Yeah. So just to sort of complete that thought, it's a very common trope that in the first act, there is a call to adventure, to use Joseph Campbell's term, and the hero usually refuses to call initially.
Yeah.
So again, if we sort of, get to the heart of things and say, okay, well, all of this stuff about story and plot and action, all of that stuff is just a ruse to sort of to set the stage for character development, which is the inner story that is really what the character is going through and really what we as viewers are identifying with. So what is that refusal of the call if we're saying the plot is irrelevant? The plot is just a little trick to get us to think about character development or play it out some way. So the refusal of the call, if the story ultimately is about change, that you, the character, you must change. And there's something about yourself that you're not even aware of that you hate, and you have to change that as a function of this story that you're going on, this adventure that you're going to go on. So the refusal of the call is this sort of insistence of, I'm fine. I don't need to change. There's nothing about me that needs changing. I'm perfectly fine the way I am. But it's a movie, so obviously that's not true. Yeah. And obviously there's something about you that has to change. And it doesn't have to be in the forefront of the film. In fact, in most cases, it's going on very subtly, subliminally within the character themselves. Yet, nevertheless, we know for a fact that when the movie is over and the character has changed and become a better person, and they're, if not aware of it consciously, at least we as the viewer are aware of it, because now they're happy, or now they can be with their wife, or now they have a new wife, or now, whatever it is, we know that they've changed. And the outside, the external story is the symbol of that change, but the real change is the change in themselves. And the refusal of the call is this sort of wonderful symbol that we ourselves are the ones who are least qualified to figure out what it is about ourselves that has to change. It's other people who tell us how we need to change.
Absolutely. No, that stands true with like what I was just saying before about about the idea I could just run away and not do those interviews, but actually doing those interviews did me the world of good. It was like, I felt better. It was a good day, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember from a writing point of view, never mind the actual thing you're trying to write. I remember somebody once saying, again, I can't remember who said it, but it was the easiest thing in the world to do is not write.
Yes. And the converse of that is, how do you become a writer? And well, you just write. That's really the only thing you do. You can obviously read books and certainly read my book and listen to your show. But at the end of the day, you can read 100 books and watch 100 shows and listen to 100 podcasts. But if you're not writing, then you're not on the journey. You haven't taken the first step.
Yeah.
Once you start writing and you feel it, you feel the process moving you, you will be pulled ahead by the process itself, just like the sea will draw you out once you sort of venture into it.
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to say, because to me, I often say to people that they sometimes focus too much on the noun and not the verb.
Right.
I want to be a writer. Well, then write. Then it's easy. It's the minute you start writing, you're a writer. There's no. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes it's the noun, and then the whole nefarious notion of when have I made it as a writer. So that becomes this, instead of the actual act of writing and what self-discovery you might have there, which is the joy of writing.
Yes.
They get focused on the idea of the job of being a writer, which is not the same thing.
It's very, very, very difficult, especially in America, but I'm sure in England it's the same. This idea of, on the one hand, you want to find a creative pursuit that you love, where you can be yourself and express yourself. But on the other hand, we all got to pay the rent and make a living. And that's the sort of the classic struggle of work of how can I do something that's personally fulfilling and that I love, but will also pay the rent. And I don't have the solution for that.
No.
I'm, like everybody else, but in terms of, but just to get back to the more simple question of how do you know if you're a writer? If you can sit down and write and just do it for the process itself and enjoy the process itself, then you're a writer, regardless of whether you ever make $1. Then
that's my point. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's like, I think once you get too heads up, I mean, look, I don't make a living from it as what people would determine, like friends of mine who work in office jobs.
Right.
But I survive, and stuff. So it's like but the process of doing it doesn't change. And the journey to get to even here, there's been a lot of nonsense has been written, but you needed to that all needs to get out of your system. It's a constant learning. I mean, weird. I didn't realize until reading your book and thinking about this interview, how much could you live in your head so much?
Yes.
And you have these psychological battles, and a lot of them are just quite fundamental binary ones of like, what's the bloody point? I might as well stop this now. And then what is it psychologically that happens that compels me to keep going? I've not worked it out. I'm glad the compulsion still remains, because it'd be more logical to just go get a job that paid me by the hour. And then I come home, have my dinner, go to sleep, wake up, get paid by the hour. That would make more sense from a logical point of view. But from an internal character point of view, whoever I am, I think it would drive me insane.
Yeah, and we all need to keep stretching and growing and trying new things and pushing ourselves farther than we ever thought we can go. And that's the symbol of the refusal of the call comes there. Meaning, oftentimes in the story, it's somebody that pulls the hero or the mentor out of their complacency and says, "No, you have to come on this adventure." Unfortunately, in real life, we don't. Those people are sort of rare and hard to come by. We have to find that within ourselves. Yeah. That person who's going to pull us out of the world of the common day, as Campbell said, and force ourselves into danger. And I mentioned before, like the sea, if you let yourself go into the sea will draw you in. Yeah. And that's a metaphor for writing. But that's also a dangerous proposition. You don't know where the sea is going to take you. Will you drown? Will you never come back? So, venturing out into the unknown, whether it's physical or in our case, figurative, is a dangerous process. You don't know where it will take you.
Now, your third prompt, which is a lovely segue, is how will your protagonist learn to love himself or herself? So what's your book helping with on the psychology on that front?
I think that's where story comes in. Meaning, if the first two questions are really all about character development and this idea of your character has to have something about themselves that they want to change, even if they're not aware of it. And your character has to sort of have this strong feeling that's going to pull them off into some type of adventure or journey. That's all about what they're going through on the inside. So then the question of how, well, that's the story itself. Meaning, what story do you need for that character, A, to grow and become the character, the person that they need to become, and B, for them to understand that that's what's happening. Again, not necessarily literally that, each scene they're saying, now I'm becoming this and now I'm learning this, but it has to be fairly clear, at least to the viewer, this is a step-by-step process of the character becoming a better person. Yeah. And that's what we all love about those main characters is like us, they're trying to grow and change.
I'm interested. How do you feel that maybe give us a couple of maybe if you can illustrate with examples how the different psychologists you referenced talk about this? I mean, do they ever contradict each other, or are they always finding themselves to the same place?
Well, if you think, like, let's take a very simple character that probably everybody understands. Not a simple character, but a well-known character like Luke Skywalker, say, from Star Wars. And we can go through these prompts. So how is your protagonist conflicted about himself? Well, in the case of Luke, when you reach him in the beginning, he's not refusing the call so much, but he sees himself as a boy looking for an adventure. So if you ask him in the beginning of the movie, what's your conflict? Why don't you like yourself? He'll say, well, I'm just, I'm bored on this planet all by myself with my elderly aunt and uncle and all this sand people. I was born for better things. I'm a great pilot. I should be fighting with the rebels. So that's the conflict that he thinks he has, but it's absolutely not the conflict that we think about when we think of Luke Skywalker. We think about more about the fact that his father is Darth Vader. And he respects what he knows about his father, that his father was a great Jedi, but he doesn't know, and he has to learn that Darth Vader is his father too. So so like many heroes, he has a very conflicted relationship with his father figure, and he has to learn that as a process of his story. So when we get to that first prompt, how is your protagonist conflicted about his or her identity? The protagonist usually doesn't know. That's the screenwriter's question for the screenwriter. When we get to the next part is, how does your protagonist hate himself or herself? Well, that comes later on in Luke's story when he realizes that there are things about him that he shares with his father. And those things might include a desire for power, a desire for prestige, a desire for control, all things that he never had. So he has to learn, okay, and by this point, we're really sort of Empire Strikes Back. We're not even in the first movie anymore. Right. But it takes at least a movie for Luke Skywalker to understand, what I hate about myself is my father, or at least the dark side of my father, Darth Vader. So how do you hate that when the thing about yourself that you hate is this person who you both love and hate? Now that's a conflict, because you can't just kill that person because you love him, and you can't, not kill that person because he's evil. So what do you do? And then we have to get to the third film to address that last prompt, or how will your protagonist learn to love himself or herself? And in this case, it's interesting. In order for Luke in Return of the Jedi to love himself, he has to change somebody else. He has to change Darth Vader from an evil character to a good character. And that's eventually what he does accomplish. He turns Darth Vader against the Emperor, and then the Death Star blows up and we're all happy. But again, but it's a little bit tricky, because if you're thinking from the beginning, there's something about this character that has to change. And then at the end you realize, what has to change about this character is not necessarily himself, although that's a big part of it, but he has to change somebody else. He has to inspire somebody else to change. Wow, that's an interesting story, right? That's an interesting story about character development. And then all of that mythology that George Lucas created with Ewoks and droids and all of that stuff, it's just a set piece to get to that really crucial, integral story at the core of those first three movies, which is, what is Luke's real conflict, not the one he thinks he has, but the one that the screenwriter knows he has. What is it about himself? His wrap up. What is it about himself that he needs to change? And so, which means that first he has to learn about himself in order to figure out what that is. Yeah. And then that last process is, well, how are you going to do it? Well, that's simply the story itself. The story itself is complicated, and there's lots of twists and turns, but the guide is there. The guide meaning, here's your character. What is it about themselves that needs to change? How are they going to figure that out? And then how are they going to do it?
so far I've only read the Freud chapter, so that's as much as I know. But what was fascinating for me reading it as someone that's been writing for the last sort of 12, 15 years is how much of it was subconscious in terms of how, I mean, I'm not comparing myself to Freud by any stretch of imagination, but what you were drawing out of what Freud was saying and saying how that is useful to story. I found it really fascinating that these were questions because you were just looking at how you make people closer in relationship to make the drama greater. You know, if people don't know each other and they're from the opposite side of the world, you go, they're in conflict. You go, so what? But if it's a father and son and one hates the other, we understand that creates drama already, you know, before you begin.
And one of my purposes in writing the book and starting with Freud is not just to say, well, it all starts with Freud, but also to make people understand that Freud does make sense. In school, we tend to learn like the Oedipus complex and the penis envy, and we learn the sort of we learn a sort of textbook version of Freud, which doesn't make sense. The average person says, I never wanted to have sex with my mother and kill my father. I can't relate to that. Yeah. And what Freud was trying to say is this is a drama. Oedipus was a drama, and we all go through that drama. But the reason Oedipus had to kill his father and have sex with his mother in order for this inner truth to be revealed to him, that doesn't have to happen in us. Again, like when I use the words love and hate for the prompts, you make things dramatic so they stand out and people pay attention to it. And that's what a story does. Yeah. But we all can relate to the Oedipus complex simply if we say, well, we're all conflicted about our parents. We love them. Well, sometimes we hate them too. Yeah. And we take that same conflict and we can project it onto any relationship with our spouses, with our friends, and most importantly, with ourselves. We love and hate ourselves. And that's why it's endless conflict. It's endless drama, not just with other people, but with ourselves.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for just giving us a kind of a look into your book, Psychology for Screenwriters. Congratulations on the second edition.
Thank you.
And it just gives me to say thank you very much for your time on the Britflicks podcast.
It was a wonderful time. It was fun talking with you.
From renowned trauma expert Dr. Judith Herman, author of the groundbreaking classic Trauma and Recovery, comes her new book, Truth and Repair, offering a powerful manifesto for reimagining justice based on the testimony of survivors. Truth and Repair is what Anita Hill calls an inspiring and practical call to action, deeply researched and compassionately told. Truth and Repair envisions a new path to justice for all. Available wherever books are sold.